world is facing multiple crises: inequality, polarisation, and the erosion of trust in institutions and in each other. Globally, we're seeing minority groups increasingly targeted, while hard-won rights are being rolled back. It can be hard to watch, especially for anyone who is involved in the campaigns to achieve those rights in the first place. My work, as both a long-time researcher in media and journalism and a community radio practitioner, focuses on how media can advance social justice and safeguard rights that advance a fairer, equitable, more inclusive world. Consider these achievements: women's right to vote, the abolition of slavery, queer people simply being allowed to exist publicly without criminalisation. At one time, each of these ideas sat outside the mainstream. They were dismissed, ignored, or framed as dangerous. Many of the rights that have recently been lost or are currently under threat were also once minority ideas. So how does a minority idea become an accepted truth? How does justice move from the margins to the centre? Well, one of the more overlooked engines of that shift to the centre is community radio, globally recognised as an effective platform for local expression and connection. There are an estimated 4,000 community radio stations around the world, active on every inhabited continent. Collectively, they can be defined as local, non-commercial radio services owned and operated by non-profit groups for the social benefit of their community. This is different to public broadcasters like the BBC, ABC Radio, or NPR, which are funded at arm's length by the state. Community radio is owned, governed, and programmed by the communities themselves, and crucially, editorial control sits with the communities served. In Australia, over 450 community radio stations broadcast every day, reaching more than 5 million listeners each week. That's nearly 1 in 4 people. These stations aren't entertainment outlets chasing mass appeal. They are community-run platforms unique to their local area, built precisely to amplify voices that commercial and public broadcasters overlook. And the sector is beautifully diverse, even if we just consider a few of the stations in this city, now known as Brisbane. Wherever community radio exists, the same types of stations emerge. 4ZZZ has spent decades broadcasting independent music, protest culture, and political dissent, long before those conversations entered mainstream debate. There are Indigenous-led stations where First Nations communities shape the conversation as leaders, not guests. In Brisbane, that role is played by AAA Murray Country. Migrant and refugee language stations allow people to participate in public life in their own languages, something mainstream media rarely prioritises. In Brisbane, that's exemplified by 4EB. Each radio station plays the same structural role, giving minority communities control of narrative before dominant institutions recognise their legitimacy. Because justice starts as a minority position. Minority voices need somewhere to grow. Community radio creates public spaces where voices aren't filtered through ratings, political pressure, advertisers, or owners. While stations may receive advertising or sponsorship support, editorial decisions remain entirely community controlled. And crucially, community radio gives airtime to ideas before they are popular, before they are safe, before they are profitable. Mainstream media follows public opinion. Community radio helps create it. Queer broadcasting provides the clearest example of how community radio accelerates social change. So here's how that acceleration played out. The details vary by country, but the pattern is consistent. Not that long ago, homosexuality was considered a criminal act in many parts of the Western world, and in some countries it still is. The World Health Organization didn't remove homosexuality from the International Classification of Diseases until 1990. It wasn't until 1991 that legislation here in the Australian state of Queensland repealed criminal penalties that had loomed over gay men for nearly a century. Transgender Queenslanders won legal recognition only in the 2000s. However, long before those rights were put in place, community radio across the globe provided a rare space where queer voices were spoken honestly and openly. Before mainstream media treated queer identity as ordinary, community broadcasters treated it as human. Queer radio programs didn't just entertain, they educated, mobilised and normalised, becoming a lifeline, a platform and a cultural home. And despite intense political and social pressure to self-censor or fall silent, community radio stations were able to keep these programs on air because editorial control remained community-controlled. They allowed people to hear voices like their own, even as much of the media landscape tried to erase them. These broadcasts helped people come out, and they helped families understand. They helped weaken prejudice. And over time, what was once framed as deviant or marginal became recognised as simply part of society. That's the power of community radio. And the same pattern repeats across many major social shifts. It goes a little like this. Community radio, platforms, minority voices. Those voices build community and legitimacy. They shape public understanding, and mainstream media is forced to follow. Political pressure grows, and laws change. Queer broadcasting is proof of concept. Marriage equality didn't start in Parliament, it started in conversations, often on community radio, where queer people told their stories directly, not filtered through hostile commentary. Community radio didn't just reflect the change in attitudes towards queer people, it helped create the social conditions that made marriage equality inevitable. Community radio also investigates corruption and social injustice when mainstream outlets stay silent due to political or commercial risk. It covers uncomfortable truths early and gives airtime to ideas that are less popular. It challenges power structures that prefer invisibility. And sometimes it doesn't just report injustice, it helps bring down corrupt systems. Again, here in Brisbane, 4ZZZ played a crucial role in exposing and sustaining public conversation about police and political corruption during the 1970s and 1980s, a period marked by heavy restrictions on protest and press freedom in Queensland. In researching the history of 4ZZZ, I've spent years immersed in its archives, its broadcasts, and with the people who built it. Founded by student activists at the University of Queensland, 4ZZZ secured one of the first community radio licences to be offered by the federal government in the mid-1970s. From the outset, it positioned itself as a home for underground music, protest culture, and voices excluded from mainstream media, and it has sustained that role for half a century. While mainstream outlets often hesitated, 4ZZZ broadcast interviews with whistleblowers, activists, lawyers and journalists who were documenting police and political corruption. It kept these stories in public circulation when others moved on. That sustained attention normalised allegations that had previously been dismissed, helping to build the public support and pressure that led to one of Australia's most significant public corruption inquiries, the Fitzgerald Inquiry, which exposed widespread police and political corruption. In a state where power tried to silence dissent, a community radio station helped crack open one of Australia's most significant public corruption inquiries. And that matters deeply right now. Around the world, we're seeing the resurgence of far-right movements and the rollback of protections for women, queer communities and racial minorities. Opposition to those forces can feel like a minority view, but history tells us minority doesn't mean wrong, it means early. So if we care about democracy and social justice, then community radio is not a niche cultural project. It is infrastructure for social change. It's where tomorrow's accepted rights are being voiced today. Without community radio, minority justice struggles can remain invisible. Invisible struggles don't build public support. Without support, politicians feel no pressure, and without pressure, injustice remains. Community radio builds a bridge between social injustice and legislative change. But it is under-resourced because it isn't driven by profit. Even though its social value is enormous, community radio only works if it survives and thrives. And that's where you come in. If we care about democracy and social justice, then we need to recognise community broadcasting as democratic infrastructure, something to be supported, protected and funded like libraries, parks or public transport. Reliable funding, training, studio space, digital tools, these aren't luxuries, they're how we ensure that participation in public life is not limited to the powerful. To our business leaders, community radio offers engaged, local and loyal listeners who tune in every day. Businesses should invest in community stations not just for audiences, but for the healthier, fairer societies that those stations help build. And to everyday people, in this room and beyond, your engagement matters. When you tune in, join as a member, volunteer your time or skills, you strengthen the fabric of your local media ecosystem. Well over 100,000 volunteers already give their time to community radio around the world. 18,000 of those are in Australia. Many more provide financial support through memberships and donations. Thank you. You make sure marginalised perspectives are heard. When community radio flourishes, we don't just get more channels on the dial. We get a more equitable society where socially just minority ideas are given time, space and legitimacy. Those voices resisting injustice today are standing exactly where earlier movements once stood. And community radio is where those voices are protected long enough to gain traction, keeping justice alive while mainstream culture catches up. We already have the stations. We already have the voices. We already have the ideas that will shape a fairer world. All we have to do is keep the signal strong. Thank you.